What's going on, friends and family? Back at y'all with another one. Today I wanted to get on. I wanted to get in light of epidemics, just because I noticed that this is something that that's starting to encompass most of our minds nowadays. It's due to the individualism that we see today, right? And as time has went on, we've been more and more individual as a result of, wanting to be ourselves, but like trying to operate out a potential that's above us, right? We see it in our minds. We know what we can do, but we don't necessarily have the available materials or the waypoints to get us there immediately, right? So it makes us want to go hone in back in on ourselves in order to find out ways to operate at our best potential. And as it comes to today, or as it relates to at least the U.S., you need at least some form of monetary value or some form of income in order to maintain that individual autonomy, right? But because of the way that the individualism has made us, and we've accepted it, and you know what, it's not too bad, right? I would say individualism is something that we've come to accept as a norm, just because it helps us operate better naturally, right? You have a better recognition with your intuition, right? And one thing I've learned too, as far as like the way we think and speak, when it comes to people like introverts or extroverts, when you use your intuition, it comes in different formats, right? And I honestly believe that there's a way to combine them. But when it comes to your intuition as an introvert, you're basically operating within the gray matter, but you think of things in your head and then you relate that back to the way you speak. So you think first and then you speak it. You don't necessarily connect like extroverts who think immediately and then connect that to speech without necessarily filtering the speech, right? So I say it's better to do it the extroverted way, but you want to do it after you've learned to be individual and learn to harness your intuition in a way that makes you more influential, right? So say you've learned a lot and then you study things, and then that builds the structure of what your intuition looks like. And then when you connect that to your direct conversation, then it makes you more profound in speech. Whereas an introvert is less likely to be engaging in, normal conversation with random people. So they are relegating their information and their intuition back to just keeping it in the mind first and thinking, and then they'll speak on when they have to speak on things, right? Type of deal. So I'm somebody who's learned to be in the middle, right? That omnivert or ambivert role, where you could be an introvert at times and an extrovert at times, just because that's more palatable for my life. I've noticed that if I'm able to just be alone when I need to be alone and learn things when I need to learn things, and then connect to speech when I want to speak to people, or like when I'm in group dynamics, it makes me more influential that way. So I believe in the future we'll see more ambiverts in general. We'll see more omniverts. It's what we're going towards anyway. We already have enough individualism, and we've had enough in the past to make us feel like it's better to operate there first and then go back into society when you have that stuff primed for you, right? But anyways, I wanted to get on in light of epidemics, because I've noticed that there's things that came about because of this individualism and because of the existence of introverts and extroverts and the way we've operated and the way they've come about, right? So I would say introvert is a response to our society in general. You see introverts come about because they are less likely to want to be around social groups, just because it happens to be very draining for the most part. Conversation does relegate down to sadism at most times, and so when you're talking about people, or when you're talking in general, it becomes very draining for some people, right? It's too much at some point. I mean, if you regulate your nervous system to allow the sadism, that's a way to operate as well, just because many people do that, but it's not something that you can maintain long term, if you ask me personally, because people change, people evolve. They don't want to necessarily be somebody who's always at the expense of others. At some point, you do want to learn for yourself, just because it makes you more it profits you more than anything else, right? And so you learn how to be autonomous that way. You learn that it's better to either be that way or the other, right? and never in between. And this is why I believe the in between will be the future, because the in between is way better than both. If you ask me, you get the best of both worlds. But the epidemics I've seen are now, when it comes to trying to conversate or trying to resonate with people that you've never known before or that you meet for the first time, we're having things like assumption interplay there, and it interferes with the natural ability to resonate with one another, as well as empowered belief of whatever you've stood on within your life, and then that contradicts with other people with their beliefs and their thinking patterns, right? But assumption itself is an epidemic. I believe we're in light, or we're coming towards realization that there is an epidemic of assumption before you even get to meet people, and it harms social interaction before we even have the ability to insert ourselves, right? Or assert yourselves in a dynamic where you could probably be somebody who is better suited in a position where you didn't have an assumption put on you before you were able to impact those people, right? So I think that assumption in itself has become an epidemic because of the way we've seen the past with extroverts and introverts. Extroverts have, for the most part, understood energetically and emotionally who introverts are and how to discern them on first presence, right? So it's, what do they think? How do they operate? What are they likely to say? How do they come about with bringing their intuition when they want to speak? What do they do when they speak, right? What does it look like? And so from what I've noticed, introverts, when they speak, they look around, right? Because this is them trying to come about with what's in their mind, their intuition. They look around in order to bring about what's in the gray matter. They want to bring in some information that they've learned in their minds, and then they bring that to speech, right? So they think first, they filter it through whatever lens, and then they bring that to the speech. This is, I would say, this is the better format for having specific things that you want to say and discern in a way to where it's more relatable to those around you, and you're assessing basically what they would think of or what they would like to hear from you. Now, I wouldn't say that you want to do this because you want to conform to somebody, right? I mean, yeah, you want to be more impactful, but the reason that you do this is to make sure that what you say is more understood easily, right? It is more relegated back to truth. You have information that you know people will want to receive from you because you've spoken it in a way that you know they would want to receive, right? Especially when you get the feedback positive from them because of you thinking first and then bringing that information. And then that allows you to have more profound impact, right? When we respect truth in general. And then extroverts are kind of opposite to that. They've decided that it's better to just go straight off the dome. Don't think about what you're trying to say. Don't necessarily try to filter through any lens. Just say what you want. And this is where I believe that certain dynamics that don't necessarily assess someone's emotional position or their spiritual or their mental position are mitigated before they interact with speaking with people, right? So when they speak, it's straight connection from intuition to speech. So they're speaking exactly what they think. They're not filtering it. The words are directly in their head and they filter it directly to you. With nothing or no structure in intent to ease the ego or ease your emotions, right? Now, this is better for speech. It allows you to speak more profound. It allows you to speak quicker, more fluent, have more diction and clarity. I would say this is better if you have a skill that requires your speech, because it's easier to bring that speech from mind to voice, right? So somebody that's a singer, is much easier to connect mind to speech, and that's better for them to do that, right? Whereas if they were introverted, it's a bit more difficult. They would have to pause and record their voice in pieces, which is the way we can do it. But if you're able to do it like, straight connection and still have that resonance of the introvert's intuition, then it's actually way more profound that way. And that's why I think when you combine the two, that creates the ambivert or the omnivert position, which is more beneficial, if you ask me, just for all parties involved. So extroverts don't necessarily connect. Well, they connect directly, but they don't filter it through any lens. They just go straight towards the connection with their intuition. And then introverts, they think first, and then they relegate that down into some form of filtered speech, and then they bring that back to you. And it sounds more profound when they speak. This is why they break it up. When they're speaking, they insert their position, then they wait for you guys to have a back and forth, and they listen to what's going on, and then they filter that information to have what they want to say filtered to you in a way that you can understand better. It's because they're likely to have a better understanding of empathy. They understand what you would think or what you would feel, so they have to use those lenses and then speak to you in a way that would help you understand without you feeling like you're being attacked, or if you're feeling like they're coming at your expense. They're not necessarily looking to drain you in conversation. They're looking to uplift you, right? This is where introverts are more profound and more impactful just in general. Whereas extroverts not necessarily assessing that kind of information, although they can, and those kind of extroverts that can are really powerful. I would say it takes a long time to be able to be an extrovert with filtered lenses, because they would have probably had to have been isolated as an extrovert for a good deal without learning how to be introverted naturally, which is kind of difficult. You want to learn to be both in life, but they don't necessarily look to use the introverted way of speaking just because it's better to use the extroverted version. And it is more difficult for an extrovert to learn the introvert, just because the extrovert position usually has a team of people around them to help them do this. They have, I would say they can be codependent in a way, but they usually have somebody that they can speak to when they want to vent or when they want to get off information. And so that becomes more of a coping mechanism in their life. So it's more reliance on other people, which is a bit more difficult to operate, because as I said before, the individualism does make people not want to engage too often, and then assumptions can demonize. But if you don't have people that you can just go to vent with or to interact with all the time, being an extrovert does become a bit more difficult. So this is why there's certain things are set up to allow extroverts to operate naturally, which is good. But there's also ways for them to go back and learn on their own in order for them to be a bit more profound when they come back and try to bring in their influence into group dynamics, right? So the assumption epidemic here are basically coming off of those lenses. Extroverts will immediately assume that somebody is introverted or is less susceptible to direct line conversation if they are thinking while they're trying to speak, or if they're assessing emotions before they speak. So they're filtering their lens, right? If they're not trying to speak quickly like them and try in a way to relate more directly to what they're speaking without trying to filter it back through a lens, they can assess that stuff quickly, right? And that assumption does demonize people. That assumption can get an introvert seen in a light that they don't necessarily align with, just because an extrovert is likely to not really, care about the situation, right? This is why I think like the way we speak does kind of does define your character as well. If you don't think before you speak, or you're less susceptible to thinking before you speak, you're also less susceptible to thinking about what you say does to people, or what you believe does to people, or how you operate, how that might affect somebody that's not like you, right? Whereas an introvert does think about that stuff before they bring speech, and they're more hesitant to insert themselves, which does isolate them in ways. And that assumption does keep them away from having potential people they could resonate with, right? Because they assume, based on the way somebody is operating before they speak with them, or the way they have spoken in a certain amount of time in their presence, that can also be demonized in a way to where they assume that this person is going to be too draining, so I don't necessarily want to bring in my presence with them, right? And so they isolate a bit more because that's more comfortable for them. And that's kind of a thing with it too. people want to maintain comfort in conversation. It is kind of weird to try to purposely put yourself in uncomfortable situations. I understand, but that also is an area of growth. So don't just shy away from uncomfort just because there is growth in there if you can allow yourself to just be within that for a while. But most people don't really want to just deal with being uncomfortable. So it's better if they find people they can resonate with easier, or people they can speak with easier, which just so happens to be introverts with other introverts and extroverts with other extroverts. And then the assumptions do keep them away from one another. And this is a kind of subtle division that we see within social dynamics as a result of the assumptions. And now I believe it's at the point of an epidemic, because now extroverts in the modern day, they just don't care if you're an introvert, right? If you're introverted, they don't really want to talk to you much unless you're giving them some sort of emotional value, unless you allow yourself to be drained consistently at your expense for them. They don't necessarily want to talk to you. If you don't feel built by having unregulated or unfiltered speech like they do, then they don't necessarily want to operate as well. Whereas an introvert, they're less likely to want to be around people who drain them too often, or they'd rather be alone for a time, and then when they feel like they're ready to speak to people, they will, which is why their friend groups are usually smaller, and why they usually only stick with people they can resonate with, who build with them, or who don't necessarily drain their energy while they speak. So they look for other introverts who can understand the way they understand, basically. But assumptions keep both parties from operating with one another, which is why I think when ambiverts and omniverts come to the table, they can bring the mediator role to both parties. So they allow the introverts to see the side of the extroverts and the extroverts to see the side of the introverts. And because they exist, their presence allows the parties to combine, right? And this is where you get really healthy groups, right? Because we have some who can be more extroverted, some who can be more introverted. You need some who can do both, right? And this allows us to be to join one another easier, and to allow ourselves to understand each other better, right? Because there is somebody who can mediate both parties. And then I think as people interact with the ambiverts more often and the omniverts more often, then they start to want to be more like them, right? Because they're so influential, and because the way they operate when they speak, and when they connect intuition to voice is more profound, people will want to be more like them, just because there's more influence, which has more potential for your life in general. So what exactly is an ambivert when it comes to intuition connection? I think it's just an introvert who has learned structure alone and learned how not to drain through conversation while assessing emotional and empathetic connection. And then they relate that back to the same format an extrovert would when they connect that intuition structure to voice directly. And that makes them sound much clearer, and makes them sound more intelligent, more profound, and it brings more influence in general for their life. There is the nuance, and there is the possibility that you could still be assumed upon because of being an ambivert. People will probably think you're to this or to that, or you think you're to this or to that, which can also isolate you as an ambivert. But that's not something you should worry about. That's more them worried about what they believe life should be like, and there's a layer of jealousy encompassed with that. So they don't necessarily want you to outshine them in their world, right? In their worldview. Not something you should worry about as an ambivert. If you are an ambivert, keep being an ambivert. You're doing a great job. You're actually helping this world in ways you have no idea. And it actually does a great job with your own life as you do it as well. So keep doing that stuff. Don't worry about what anybody ever says about you. You're doing absolutely wonderful as an ambivert. But yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to get on. The idea that assumption can keep us from each other is, I think, a tactic of division that our social systems use, or that is profited upon by the government, because they're looking for ways to get us divided. They don't want us to join one another. They don't want us to be together, just because there's fear of rebellion, right? As time is going on, as we're noticing how society is operating nowadays, there's fear of rebellion that they think on, and they don't necessarily want you to to understand that well, and they know that the ambivert and the omnivert is a direct reflection of what they don't want to see, right? And this is why we have to not really worry about the opinions of others or what other authority figures say, because their ideology is not necessarily based on reality. When they tell you that you're not supposed to do this or that, if it's not based on some form of truth or to uphold all of our autonomy or stability, you shouldn't really worry about it. It doesn't matter if it's a government or authority or police or a manager. If what they're saying to you is not necessarily helping you, you don't have to listen to that stuff. You are the authority of your own life. You're your own adult, your own person, your own being, your own thinking entity. You don't have to listen to anybody else, right? Especially if they're not helping you. Now, when it does come to you wanting to conform to specific dynamics that are out of your control, then sure, you do have to listen to a degree. But if it's gonna harm you, you don't wanna have to deal with that. You don't wanna have to go and tell yourself that this is what I have to do in order to be a part of this group, or this is what I have to do in order to conform to the way they think or speak, right? If it harms you. If you want to, you can. Like, I don't judge anybody for having their circumstances the way they are. If that's what you want to do, that's what you can do. If you want to be somebody who's more of a follower than a leader, or who doesn't necessarily think for themselves and would rather have somebody control that for them, that's on you. But just know that there are consequences in the long run if what they control you with is not necessarily beneficial for you. All right. That's all I wanted to get on. Hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Hopefully you guys learned something. I always want to teach because I've learned so much from being both roles. I've been an extrovert and an introvert for a long time. It's why I'm so bent on being an ambivert, because I know like that is just so beneficial, not only for yourself, but when you have friends, like when you have people that you resonate with, they like that ambiverted nature, because there's so much capability to influence, to understand, to connect with one another, and it allows the social dynamics and the conversations to be better, more fun, more educated, more entertaining, and just way better in general, right? And that's all I can say on that. And it's the best I've ever experienced as an ambivert. I would love for everybody to try to be one as well. I think we're all gonna be one at some point, or if we're not already. And it'll help all of us connect with each other, one another, and it'll allow us to be better speakers in the future as well. But that's all I want to get on. Hope you guys had a great day, and I'll see you in the next one. All right.